You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
You're listening to Making Tracks. This is episode 135. I'm your co-host, Mark Newbold, and joining me today is a man who was supposed to be out playing with the boys last night, but instead stayed at home on his own and played by himself. It's Mark Mulcaster. How you doing?
I'm all right. I was meant to be gigging last night, but that didn't happen. Unfortunately, COVID has struck again, and Elixir's guitarist Phil has gone down with it this time, so we had to cancel the gig. So I was left plucking my G-string all by myself.
Such is life.
Such is life. Yeah, these things happen. How's things with you, my friend? How's that cough?
Still there. Listeners won't really know this other than me saying I've had COVID, but you and me have been editing like crazy to get rid of all the coughs and splutters. So we've managed to hopefully hide most of it from people. But yeah, it's still there. Not as bad as it was.
That's good.
But when I talk, it comes back. Hey-ho. Busy week for Star Wars. We're now into May, so Celebration Month and Star Wars Fan Fun Days next weekend. How about you?
I'm good, thanks, dude. Yeah, all very well. And yeah, just kind of looking forward to the deluge of news that's going to be coming out in, I think, probably next few weeks.
But ahead of that, have you had any stuff come into your collection this week, Mark?
Yes, I have. I have had the Retro Collection Wave 4. I think it was Wave 4. Basically, some more Mandalorian retro figures, including the Morak Boba Fett. So that was pretty cool.
Nice,
and actually,
nice.
turns out that I already had one of those. So I had the really lovely experience of sitting down and actually taking them out of the packaging, out of the bubble.
What?
I know. It was a exciting and gratifying moment, I have to say.
Well, enjoy that, because there could be a time in the not too distant future where taking the bubble off something is a thing of the past.
Thing of the past. Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, you're alluding to the fact that Hasbro have on some of their lines, I think it's the Marvel Legends lines, well, they've basically thrown away using plastic in their packaging. For Star Wars fans, and especially the vintage collection collectors such as myself, that has caused quite a lot of arguments about, you know, whether or not Hasbro will do it with vintage collection figures, and obviously if they do, what does that mean for the packaging and also the true nature of the line. And obviously there's people kind of saying, right, well, that's it, I'm done. But, you know, if they do it, that's it. That's me out of collecting and that, which, of course, you know, it's a nice sentiment, but, you know, it only takes one good figure and you're deep back in it.
We do have a Hasbro Fan First Wednesday coming up this week, so I'm sure we'll talk about that next week. And this may very well be a topic of conversation then, mightn't it? We might know a bit more about it.
Well, exactly, yeah. I mean, and to be fair, you know, some of the figures that they did announce not so long ago, the, like, deluxe figures, they are without any kind of plastic bubbling and stuff like that on the packaging, so it may have already started. I'm sure we will find out sooner or later. I also got one other thing, which I have to admit, unless it's tucked somewhere deep in the bowels of my collection and I haven't found it, I'm ashamed to say, but it's basically taken me 21 years to buy this book. But I ordered this week the Galactic Phrase and Travel Guide by Ben Byrne. I got it off of Amazon, brand new. So I was actually amazed I didn't have to actually go to eBay to find it, because I was expecting to have to get a secondhand copy. It's, you know, it's still being printed. It's got like the Disney logo on the back. So clearly it's something that they still think is worthy of being printed 20 odd years later. So fantastic. How about yourself? What have you had?
Not a huge amount this week. It's been a fairly quiet week. But what I have been doing is I've been changing the collection room around. I started it last week.
Yeah.
And I've continued throughout the week. So I've got to the point now where I've moved enough things around that I can move stuff off shelves that have basically been there for like 7 or 8 years and move them across the room into different areas as I'm boxing and tubbing things up to go into the spare room. And then eventually I can move those around and get that sorted out. That's the plan. Probably just end up in boxes forever now and just focus on the Star Wars stuff. It's coming together well. It's been fun sort of seeing stuff that I've not seen for a while, especially sort of the comic related, you know, my old Marvel bits and bobs. That's been kind of fun doing that. But yeah, it's coming together nicely now, just even to the point of I've found a spot for all my T-shirts and all those sort of, like my Lucasfilm T-shirts and all the convention T-shirts and stuff, just in great big tubs. I mean, I don't know, I'm scared to even guess how many T-shirts I've got. It's frightening. It's 5 big sort of 100-litre tubs high, just T-shirts. But I managed to find a spot for them to go, and I've got one bookcase that's all role-play stuff now, so West End Wizards, Fantasy Flight and all that. So that's come together really nicely. So I'm just sort of working slowly around the room. And that poor spare room, it's crammed full of just boxes now, I'll get there. It's been a productive week, though, in that sense. It's been very good.
So, what have we got to talk about then today? What is in the news?
We shall kick off with convention news. And with Celebration Anaheim happening 26th to 29th of May, we are now in the celebration month. And there's not that many weeks to go. News has landed on StarWars.com and StarWarsCelebration.com as well of some of the panels that are happening over the 4 days. There's some really cool stuff. They give details of the Celebration stage, Galaxy stage, and Twin Sun stage. So no collecting track info, which we have been posting on Fantha. So there's an article that's constantly updated with that. But just to get kicked off, 1 till 2 o'clock on the Thursday, David Collins is back. He did a panel last time round on the music of the Phantom Menace. This time he's looking at Attack of the Clones, obviously, in its 20th anniversary. Awesome name for a panel, Attack of the Chords, which I thought was brilliant. Always interesting to listen to David talk about music, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it would be an understatement to say that Dave knows his stuff. And, he's done some really, really fun and interesting panels over years at Celebration when he's put in the alternate audio tracks onto various different scenes from the films. That was always interesting. But also, what is quite nice, there's a little bit of a niggle or nagging kind of worry. The Attack of the Clones 20th anniversary was possibly going to be maybe skipped over, but there's a couple of panels that they put out which is going to be celebrating the 20th anniversary. And I suppose the more films and the more TV stuff, every year will be a anniversary for something. But obviously, with Attack of the Clones being such a important film in the saga, I think it's definitely worth spending some time and celebrating the fact it's 20 years old.
20 years, incredible. Yeah. You're right. I'm glad they're doing that. They did it with Phantom at the last Celebration, and now they're doing it with Clones, which I'd say it's probably the most underappreciated of the Star Wars films. So I'm glad it's getting its moment in the spotlight. That's on the Galaxy stage. On the Twin Sun stage, Stories from a Galaxy Far, Far Away, Lucasfilm Publishing. So you're going to be speaking to people from, obviously, Disney Lucasfilm Press, Del Rey, Dark Horse, and moderated by Michael Siglane. Ian McDiarmid's on the Celebration stage, talking about his time as the Emperor. There's a High Republic panel for Light and Life on the Galaxy stage. So many of the authors from Project Luminous will be there for that. Lego panels on the Friday.
You almost expect to be able to get some kind of news and announcements and new release sneak peeks. It's cool that that's going to be there. One of the panels that really piques my interest and should be quite fun is on the Galaxy stage, and that is 35 years of Star Tours. So that is going to basically be a nice look back at the, obviously the ride that really kicked off everything with Lucasfilm and Disney's kind of relationship, which obviously has led to where we are now, and obviously the fantastic Galaxy's Edge.
Yeah, absolutely. I do know on the collector's track there is a panel about Star Tours as well, about the Star Tours collectible, cool. So that ties up really nicely with that. There's a tabletop games panel on the Twin Sun stage moderated by Justin Bolger, formerly of Lucasfilm, now at Asmodee. So they're going to be talking about Atomic Mass, Fantasy Flight, Z-Man games, all the current games that are going on. But good to see that getting a bit of love. Also, there is a conversation on the Saturday, 11 till 12, with Favreau and Filoni on the Galaxy and Twin Sun stages, streamed to them live, obviously, on the main Celebration stage. So they're looking at Mando, they're looking at Book of Boba Fett. Also gives us a snippet of what's to come in there behind the scenes of the Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett panel, 1 till 2 o'clock. So we'll see a little bit more there. And rolling through the day, 2:30 till 3:30, Tales of the Jedi, animated anthology. I've heard that it's 6 episodes. Yeah. So that'll be very interesting. So that's Amy Ratcliffe on the Celebration stage talking to Dave Filoni. Sadly clashes with Making Tracks Live, 2 till 3 on the podcast stage. Doug Chang designing the Mandalorian. That's on the Galaxy stage, 4 till 5 on the Saturday. There's a Marvel Comics panel, 4:30 till 5:30 on the Twin Sun stage. I could go on and on. Anthony Daniels, 5:30 till 6:30. Bad Batch Season 2 on the Sunday, 11 till 12 on the Celebration stage, streamed to Galaxy and Twin Suns. That's David Collins talking to the producers of Bad Batch. So we're going to learn a little bit more about Season 2. I'm really looking forward to Season 2 Bad Batch. What about you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This time last year, we were talking about Bad Batch season, Season 1. We were doing our reviews. So hopefully, it won't be too far in the future that we get Season 2 of Bad Batch, because, it's well overdue, in my opinion.
Absolutely, and that's when we'll be back with some more reaction chats, as we will for Obi-Wan and everything else as we go forward. 1 till 2 on the Galaxy stage, The Wonderful World of Wookiees. That's Amy Ratcliffe again speaking to Eunice Suetamo and Kerry Jones from the Book of Boba Fett, Charles Soule, who's the writer of The High Republic but has written Buriaga from that storyline. So that'll be fascinating, and obviously we're going to miss Peter Mayhew very much at that panel. The one I think could be absolutely fascinating is live on the Twin Sun stage, 2 till 3, The Creatures of Return of the Jedi. You got Kirk Thatcher, who most people will know as the punk on the bus from Star Trek 4, but Kirk worked on Return of the Jedi and then all sorts of other stuff in the years since. Tom Spina, who we will be speaking to on Fantha Tracks very, very soon. Hopefully next week you'll hear us chatting with Tom about what's coming. Again with Amy Ratcliffe, delving into Jabba's Palace in such detail with people who know so much about it.
It's always fascinating, and I think, there's so much depth of knowledge there and experience, and also I think Return of the Jedi, more than any other film, best diversity of characters that they created.
Yeah.
It's like that making of Return of the Jedi VHS that they put out many years ago with Billy D and that. It's one of those things that you want to return to and watch time and time again. So that should be a fascinating little panel.
It will. It absolutely will. And then the whole kit and caboodle closes 3:30 till 4:30 on the Celebration stage, streamed to Galaxy and Twin Suns, the closing ceremony, where hopefully, like they used to back in the day, they'll announce where the next celebration's going to be. And fingers crossed, it won't be too long, and selfishly for you and me, hopefully won't be too far away.
That would be great. I tell you what, if it's in London, that'd be fantastic. Although, saying that, it would be almost as great if it was in Germany again, because at least for me, and a lot of the UK rebels and 501st members, they said they had an absolutely fantastic time out in Germany. What's great about that is actually it's not too far away, so it's not too expensive to get there. And from an organisational standpoint, anyway, means I don't have so much work to do, which is not a bad thing.
In other Celebration news, Mark Hamill has announced he won't be at Celebration Anaheim. He's working out of the country. I believe he's in Canada filming the Fall of the House of Usher. How much do you think Celebration will miss Mark? Obviously, they're going to miss Mark. Do you think there's enough going on with everything else that will be okay and we'll have him back at the next one, sort of thing?
This one's going to be a real heavy focus on Kenobi. We've got Ewan McGregor there and Hayden and that, and obviously it's a shame. It's also good that Mark is, working on other stuff because, Mark is a fantastic actor and, it's great that he's still doing stuff. I'm sure he will be missed. He'll be back. He's basically got an open invite, hasn't he, to any celebrations if his schedule allows.
Oh, yeah, he's certainly got an open invite to any convention in the UK that he wants to come to. If you want to come down to Far This from Mark, you're more than welcome.
Well, I can if you want. Is that what you talking to this Mark?
Yeah, of course, that's what I meant. Yeah, obviously, that's what I meant, yeah.
Hey man, it's me, Kevin Smith, a Star Wars fan, Fantha Tracks fan.
While on the topic of conventions, Star Wars Fan Fun Day is taking place next weekend at Blackburn. It's a move from Burnley where they've been for the last number of years. Whole slew of great guests coming, which did, until this week, include Warwick Davis, Annabelle Davis and Harrison Davis, but they've all had to cancel. Warwick's working on Willow. Harrison and Annabelle are working on The Witcher, so they've had to sadly pull out of the event. New guests have been announced. We've got details from The Force Awakens, Rogue One, The Last Jedi and Solo, and Charlotte Louise, who was in Rogue One, Last Jedi, Solo and The Rise of Skywalker. You'll recognise their characters as soon as you hit the page on Fantha Tracks. Shame that Warwick can't make it.
Yeah.
It was a good pull for the show, wasn't he?
Always, yeah, and the whole Davis clan as well. It will be missed. We know details very well, and he is by no means a mere stand-in or replacement for Warwick. He's fascinating and he's got some cracking stories. So, if you get a chance to head along to Star Wars Family Fun Day, then make sure you spend time and meet Dee and also Charlotte Louise, because both of them are lovely.
Absolutely, yeah. I've never met Charlotte. Looking forward to meeting her. She's, like you say, she's got a good, cool array of characters there to discuss, and hopefully we'll be bringing that to Making Tracks pretty soon once the show's done. Definitely speak to Dee, and if anyone who's ever met Dee, like you've just said, Dee can talk. So we'll probably have a whole Dee episode with all of his stories, because he's got loads of very, very cool stories. But yeah, always look forward to Star Wars Fan Fun Day. Shame that Warwick can't make it, but event moves on. But before we move off the topic of Star Wars Fan Fun Day, readers of Fantha Tracks will have seen that we ran a very quick, and I mean very quick, competition to win a couple of tickets to the show. We picked the winner this morning, and the winner is Mike Roberts. We'll drop you a line to grab your address so we can post your tickets out to you, and hopefully we'll make sure you come up and see us next week at Fan Fun Day. You'll see us with the dudes in the Fantha t-shirts. They announced also the patch for Star Wars Fan Fun Day this year is a really wonderful R2-D2 patch. It goes fantastically well with all the other glorious patches they've done over the years. £5, so grab that. And also, we will be debuting our new Fantha Tracks badge.
Ooh.
It's the first place you'll be able to grab one, so just come up and say hi to us, and all you've got to do is show that you follow us. Either follow the website, or you follow us on any of our social media feeds, or listen to Making Tracks, any of them, do that, and you get a nice, and they're quite big, a nice Fantha Tracks badge.
Look forward to getting mine. Cough, cough. Nudge, nudge.
Okay, so congratulations to Mike for your ticket win, and to everybody else, we'll see you next weekend at Star Wars Fan Fun Day.
Hi, this is Guy Henry, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. Enjoy.
Good news, Ewan McGregor and Mary Elizabeth Winstead got married last weekend over in the States in a very small ceremony for friends and family. Obviously, Ewan will be seen on screen very, very soon in Obi-Wan Kenobi and at Celebration, and Mary Elizabeth has apparently got a role in Ahsoka. It's a happy story for a change.
Yeah, don't get too much of those these days. So yeah, congratulations.
But moving on to the real meaty story, Ewan McGregor talking in Total Film magazine about his appearance, obviously, as Obi-Wan Kenobi. And something that he said was something I've never really considered. And I'll read the quote because it's a very good quote. I've never met Darth Vader. I had rehearsed the scene with Vader, but not with a helmet on or anything like that. When we came to do the scene, when they shouted action, he had to come from behind me. I turned around and Darth Vader was coming at me. It was like I was 6 again. I'd never acted into Vader's helmet. I'd never looked him in the eye. It scared the out of me. I'm not joking. It gave me a proper jolt of absolute fear. I was like, oh my God, that's not acting. That's real. I'm really, truly frightened now. And the same thing would happen with the Stormtroopers. I'd worked with clone troopers before, but so many of them were CGI. I never worked with Stormtroopers. And again, I was like 7 years old, because when you're actually faced with a Stormtrooper with a blaster, it's like, now. So, yeah, there's Ewan properly feeling the moment. And he continues, it's like actual childhood memories of being scared. That's how deeply it's in us. I've acted for 30 years and I've never been genuinely frightened when I'm acting frightened. But I had moments on this that were genuinely quite scary. It's so funny. What do you make of that? I think that's fascinating that he's clearly into this. It feels, it's not just PR crap, is it? It feels like he's really got a buzz out of this.
Yeah, tell you what, fair play, because I have been at many a convention. In fact, even the first few times I trooped, when you actually get somebody who is 6'6" plus in a Darth Vader costume, and they come bearing down on you, it is quite unsettling. It's no wonder why Darth Vader probably holds the record for making the most babies cry at Comic-Cons. Because, there is something about it. And, if you want to be really a bit picky and play semantics, I'm sure there's a few comic book guys out there who go, well, actually, Anakin was actually Darth Vader when he faced off against Ewan in Revenge of the Sith. However, that's not Darth Vader. That's Anakin Skywalker as Darth Vader. This is... Yeah. As he says, Darth Vader. It seems like everybody's skipping over the fact that, and making no attempts to hide the fact that definitely going to be some kind of showdown. They're not trying to kind of keep this hidden. There's no secret squirrel or mystery box or anything. It's like Obi-Wan and Darth Vader rematch is happening. So I, for one, cannot freaking wait. And I'm not going to swear because I clearly don't have the clout of Ewan McGregor.
Or the bleeper button like we've got here on Making Tracks.
True.
Deborah Chow says there was a moment of silence collectively when he first came onto set. Just having Vader standing in front of you is a crazy thing. It's an amazing thing, but it's very intense when you first start doing it. So basically, she says what you say, in that physically that is an intimidating character. But just the thought of the classic fight at the end of Revenge of the Sith, we know he's now been deemed Darth Vader by the Emperor, but he's still Anakin to us, and he's still Anakin to Ben. So, or Obi-Wan as he was at that point. So Vader and Kenobi have fought before on Mustafar, but Ewan has never been on set with that Darth Vader. To think of it in those terms, those two going at it like that, it's not something you've really considered. Poor old Alec Guinness had to get battered to bits by Dave Prowse, of course, on the set of Star Wars. But, which apparently was Lucas's favourite scene to film, I read this week, from the original movie. Yeah.
Interesting. That's probably one of those things that, bearing in mind, especially with like A New Hope, everything was going wrong. When you can actually just have two characters kind of face off and you have a bit of rough and tumble with each other, that's probably got to be quite fun to do. I mean, because it wasn't really like the longest fight, so, all very like too complicated, other than the fact that, the lightsaber blades kept on breaking. And interesting little tidbit there. Thanks, Newbold.
And I suppose it's that swashbuckling feel about it, and it's the Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon sort of facing down the bad guy moment, isn't it? So there's some logic to that. But really, a lot of people have been talking about how, I mean, it's Star Wars, so everything's from a certain point of view, isn't it? But how you would massage what was said in A New Hope to make this meeting work, in the timeline and such. The great thing about A New Hope, which is why all Star Wars proliferated off the back of that one film, is that it's vague enough Star Wars in general has a tendency to get a bit too granular.
Mm-hmm.
But A New Hope is actually pleasingly vague in places. And so what Anakin or Vader says and what Obi-Wan says, Ben, there's enough in it to make clear what they're talking about, but it's not giving you dates and times and places, is it? It's just vague enough that the fight, the last time we met sort of vibe in A New Hope, we think it's talking about Revenge of the Sith, which of course, if they'd never made any more Star Wars after Revenge of the Sith, it would have done, because we'd never know any different.
Yeah.
But as it is now, they've been very clever. They can now drop in the events of Kenobi, which is still 10 years ago, to A New Hope, and that's what they were talking about. I think that's delicious. I think that's brilliant.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
Good news! Roll out the red carpet because we have some listeners' questions. And our first listener question comes from Alan Wills, and he asks, the panels for Celebration don't seem to lend themselves to any new Star Wars film content being announced. Do you think there will be any film-related announcements?
That's a good question, because you're right, it does feel very TV focused, like all of Star Wars is at the moment. But nevertheless, I mean, CinemaCon just happened and there was loads of announcements for this, that and the other, and whilst there was nothing announced for Star Wars, as it stands, we've still got that, 23rd of December 2023 date penciled in, which is the same time as the new Star Trek film is coming, so we've still got that interesting potential of a clash there. I would be surprised if there was no news at all, if there was no mention at all. It wouldn't surprise me if they alluded to something and then sort of waited till D23 or New York Comic Con, or because they've got to save announcements for sort of later on in the year for other things.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't see a massive amount of movie news or movie announcements, because generally Celebration, it doesn't feel like the place to announce stuff. It feels like the place to expand on stuff. Does that make sense? I can't really imagine them announcing we're doing a film at Celebration. I think that generally would be announced elsewhere, and Celebration would be the place that they would expand upon that. Very much like to be wrong, though, because I really, really would look forward to the potential of, the whole press tour and the stuff that you do with the Legion and so on and so forth. So hopefully, but I'm not holding my breath. What about you?
No, you do actually make a good point, because actually I think every kind of film announcement really has come outside of Celebration, really. I mean, I think probably the closest we've had to film announcements was possibly the Clone Wars and maybe the Blu-ray box set being released. You know, scanning down the long list of panels, the Lucasfilm Studio Showcase is possibly the one that would, at least to me, I think, scream out, if you're going to drop a Star Wars film announcement, you're going to probably plonk it in there. Now, obviously, like you said, whether or not it's going to just be a mention or if it's going to be some big announcement, who's to say? But in the past, especially recently, a lot of these big announcements have been tied more around Disney earning calls and shareholders calls and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So the good thing is the Studio Showcase is like the first thing on Thursday. So you're going to get it out. You're going to get it out early. That's great. But at the same time, they've already listed on the website, it's looking at Kenobi, Andor, and The Mandalorian. So one would expect maybe another trailer for Kenobi and potentially another trailer for Andor, and then news about Mandalorian Season 3. So those are three big things already announced, and then you stick on another film announcement, and obviously it then becomes it doesn't necessarily have the spotlight and the focus that maybe it needs and maybe it deserves as well. If we don't get a film announcement, I don't think it's necessarily the end of the world. I mean, Celebration's the first big convention really of the year for Star Wars, and then obviously D23 and potentially San Diego. So there's still hope and there's still time.
Just a thought outside the box. You've got Book of Boba Fett.
Yeah.
You've got The Mandalorian. You've got Ahsoka. They've put a pin in Rangers of the New Republic, but the plan was to have 4 series.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any scope or potential for those 4 series to come together? Because they do describe it as an event with a sort of focal point. Do you think there's any potential for that focal point to be on the big screen, or do you think it will exclusively be on Disney Plus?
I think it will be exclusively for Disney Plus. The Mandalorian being pretty much one of your tentpole series on your streaming platform, and it's going to be a coming together kind of team up. It could be like a special, it could be like a mini series, or a one-off feature length.
Yeah,
it makes sense to have it all there. That would probably be my strategy. What about you?
At some juncture, you're going to see the Mandalorian on the big screen.
Yeah,
we've seen Boba Fett on the big screen. We've seen other characters on the big screen, but it feels like at some point, if they unless they want to keep Mando always on television, you could have him in both. I mean, there's no reason why not to have him in both. It's not like you need, for example, Pedro Pascal to always be around to play the physical embodiment of the Mandalorian, because unlike Fett, he doesn't often take his helmet off, but he's there to do the voice, which is the heart and soul of the character. Yeah, I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me one iota. Just the question came to mind. I just wonder whether there's options and avenues. Of course, there is to discuss everything, but options and avenues to do something cinematically with those characters. I think, it'll be more like the Defenders with the Netflix stuff. They'll culminate it into something on Disney Plus and make an event of it in that arena.
I'm Brian Herring, BB-8 puppeteer, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. That'll learn you.
So speaking of Celebration news and announcements and stuff, we also have another question from the Chicago Force fan group, which I think tweeted you for question on, I guess, Twitter.
It was on Twitter.
Yeah, there you go. So before everybody left when Elon Musk tried to buy it. Basically, they ask, do you think we will get an Andor teaser at Celebration? You'd think it's decent odds that we're going to get it. I wouldn't say no-brainer. If it's going to be out this year, now's the time to do it. Put it out for Celebration. Yeah,
it's a good question. I don't think you can assume anything, can you, really, other than what they've sort of briefly told you in the panel reveals. But yeah, I'd be amazed if we didn't get at least a 60-second teaser.
Yeah.
You've got to see, like they very subtly sort of showed you, like the Entertainment Weekly, the last physical issue, Kenobi on the cover, and the first little teaser thing, and it's just starting to build up now because we're only 3 weeks away from it landing.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got to start seeing stuff from Andor. Even if they just sort of say in that panel, oh, well, Andor will be hitting Disney Plus on the 10th of September or whatever, I don't know, pick a number. You need to start seeing stuff because they've got to build up interest in it. Because as it has been with Mando, when Mando's on, everything's Mando. When Book of Boba Fett's on, everything's Book of Boba Fett. And as soon as that final episode came out, it was almost like it was forgotten by the following Monday. Because Star Wars moves on so quickly now, unlike the way it used to with the movies. You'd have a movie come out and you'd spend the next 3 years just talking about that film until the next film came out. Now you have an episode out on a Wednesday, by the following sort of Monday, it's forgotten about. Then a Wednesday and the next episode's out and that's all anyone's talking about. So Star Wars is so much more immediate now than it ever used to be. More Star Wars content's a great thing. It's great for us as content providers, if you like, with what we do on Fantha and the podcast and stuff. It gives us loads to talk about. But there's also a lot to be said for sort of ruminating and pontificating and chewing over stuff for a little bit longer. You don't really get that so much now. You can, of course you can if you want to, but you want to be relevant.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of this is relevancy, isn't it? You got to put Andor in people's heads so that once you've had Kenobi and once you've had Bad Batch Season 2, I would imagine Andor will come before Mando. They know they don't need to over-egg the pie with Mando so much because everyone's invested and they're ready for it. So Mando's sold itself, but Andor hasn't, and they've got to grab that outside audience. So yes, long answer to a short question. Yes, I think there will be an Andor teaser.
No, me too as well. Now that we've got the Mandalorian and everybody kind of knows roughly what it is and what we're going to get from it, it's kind of quantifiable. And obviously, Kenobi pretty much is a much more recognisable name. Andor as a entity is definitely going to be a harder one to drop with no real kind of a run up or lead up to it. So I would imagine, there's going to be at least the run up to Andor. There's going to be quite a lot coverage of pushing it and talking about it and just trying to kind of get it into the general public's kind of consciousness and that. And I suppose maybe it's a case of, let's start at Celebration and let's ramp it up. Let's do some tease or something, or, even maybe Diego Luna comes out. I mean, it's not like we haven't had these kind of roll-in panels where basically you have one panel and you have 15 kind of people all on, pretty much like they had with the cast of Force Awakens.
Well, it's like the Rogue One panel, wasn't it?
Yeah, they kind of introduce everybody kind of separately, don't they? So you could, you could do that, but you do it in shows. So I'm sure we're going to get something from Andor.
Yeah, I'm just saying about London and that when Mendelsohn came out as Krennic and did the little march with the Death Troopers, which was fantastically cool. Maybe you wouldn't get something like that, but I mean, here's another thought on the lead up to, well, really to all of the movies, the 5 movies, the Journey to The Force Awakens, Journey to The Last Jedi and such, and Rogue One and Solo had similar things. I really enjoyed them. I thought they were a great sort of marketing thing, and just to get you hyped and just put it in your head far enough out that you were leading up to something. Do you think they should do something like that? Not so much for Mando, they don't need it. Not so much for Kenobi because it's nearly here. But for something like Andor, which feels like, to the internal audience, I think we're all buzzed for it because we kind of know what it's about.
Yeah.
But to the outside world, it's probably the toughest sell. Do you think there'd be some benefit to doing that?
Yeah, I'm sure they could do something. I suppose it all comes down to when it's going to drop, really, doesn't it? I mean, those journeys to like The Force Awakens and Last Jedi and stuff like that, they kind of started, well, really, some of them, I think, because it was a publishing program more than anything, they almost started about 6 months to a year, almost before the film came out, you know, just so you could get everything in. But then at the same time, you tie that in with like a Force Friday or something like that, closer to it, and you know there's a bit of a push on Andor products, you know, a bit like we had the Bounty Hunter stuff back in kind of October, November for Mandalorian on stars.com, and start pushing all those products. Admittedly, there was probably way too many products, and I think it fell a little bit flat. But then, you know, if you just do a single streaming kind of presentation or something, can make it a bit special. And again, the more content there is, then the more people are going to start talking about it, and the more buzz there's going to be. So we're talking as if like Lucasfilm and Disney haven't put out shows and movies before. I'm sure they've probably got like a relatively robust strategy going forward for Andor. At least that's what I'd hope.
And rebellions are built on hope.
Hello, I'm Dennis Lawson, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Our third and final question is from the lovely people, and that comes from Newbold's own personal experience from the Rule the Galaxy podcast, because he's been on it and I haven't. Hint, hint. And the question is, will we hear from Duchess Satine or Qui-Gon Jinn in the Kenobi series while Obi-Wan is meditating on Tatooine?
It's a great question. Yeah. It really is a great question. I think in terms of Qui-Gon, I'd be amazed if he didn't. Mostly, I say that one because it just feels logical, because Yoda alludes to it right at the end of Revenge of the Sith, and more than alludes to it, he says he's been communing with Qui-Gon, and I'll teach you how to do it. So it's an obvious hook to Revenge of the Sith. But also, just Liam Neeson sort of saying, oh, I'd come back for films. I don't know if I'd come back for television. The week he does one of the funniest sketches ever on Derry Girls on Channel 4.
Yeah.
That's a load of nonsense. So I think that, to me, that pretty much confirms he's going to be back in some form or fashion. And I'm glad he is, because he came back and did that little bit in Rebels. He did the voice at the end of Rise of Skywalker, so he's not averse to doing it. And goodness knows, he barely looks any different. And it was. I put a piece on Twitter saying that Ewan McGregor, when he filmed Kenobi, was 5 years older than Liam Neeson was when he filmed The Phantom Menace, which is kind of scary when you think about that. So I think Qui-Gon, yes. Satine is different. I think you'll see Satine, but I don't know if it will be in any sort of Force meditation. I think that will be more of a flashback, because there's all those regrets. Obviously, there was an emotional attachment between Satine and Obi-Wan, and for viewers of the Clone Wars, that's a monster payoff moment. So I really hope they go there in some fashion. I don't know whether it will be in a meditation, but certainly if Ben, or maybe, if Ben is literally meditating, it doesn't all have to be Force related. We did an episode a few weeks ago called Zen Ben, didn't we? And it was that whole getting himself into the right state of mind to do what he's got to do. And that's not necessarily all to do with the Force. You do sometimes literally meditate and just get your head set. And maybe when Ben's doing that, Obi-Wan's doing that, Satine will wander into his thoughts. What do you think?
I mean, I think you're right with respects to Qui-Gon. I think it would be a missed opportunity, as obvious a choice as having Kenobi fight Vader. But yeah, the Satine one is an interesting, and it would depend massively upon the route of the story. I could see that would be quite a difficult thing to explain easily to the average moviegoer, unless it was just, some kind of like fairly vague reference to having feelings for somebody in the past. Otherwise, you've suddenly got to get into the whole Mandalore kind of thing, and the fact that, she died, and really, I don't even think we necessarily know the full backstory, do we, of like Satine and Kenobi. I think in the show it was kind of built on. The fans potentially picked up, or there was like a hint, and then they kind of built on it in a couple of like later kind of episodes and stuff. That's not to say that maybe we don't get this if there's a Kenobi Series 2, for example. From what we're seeing so far with Kenobi, it's like the focus is massively on Kenobi versus Vader rather than Kenobi's previous like love relationships. But that being said, he's on Tatooine, and I know I've joked a lot about a love triangle with Owen and Beru and Ben, but at the same time, he is by himself. You know, at least when you read the High Republic, it's not like these Jedi are kind of monks and stuff, you know, who are completely celibate. You know, you'd kind of think that he would end up forging some close relationships, and maybe that's another thing he has to wrestle with. Do you have to kind of reevaluate the whole attachment philosophy?
Without a Jedi Order, how much of a Jedi is he still?
Yeah, exactly. How much can you maintain of the Jedi philosophy, or at least, you know, the dogma of like the Jedi Council, that if there isn't a Jedi Council? Anakin had attachment issues, and his fault of dark side was primarily about his love for Padme. You could contrast that with Obi-Wan's feelings and attachment for Satine. So there would be direct parallel there, but you can see how two different people took two different routes. So that would be an interesting story to explore. The question is whether or not it's something that is going to be the thing that you want to get done in the first season, or something that maybe gets explored later on, should we get any more Kenobi.
So you're basically saying that Satine, she was his Padme.
Absolutely, yeah.
If we have flashback scenes of Anakin and Padme, let's say Natalie Portman in some form or fashion, we'd be delighted, but I don't think we'd be hugely surprised. By the same token, Satine as an animated character, you've got to, like you say, you've got to convey a lot of stuff in a short amount of time for that parallel that we know as fans from watching the Clone Wars and putting two and two together. And like you've just really laid that out really well. We get that, but to make that make sense to people who maybe aren't as versed in the Clone Wars era and stories and characters might be a bit of a stretch. So yeah, I think you could be right. I think it depends on what happens in season 1 to Ben. You know, he's
exactly.
Like you say, he's got a lot to reconcile, hasn't he? You know, being on his own, and it's all very good being told how to commune with the Force and Qui-Gon by Yoda on Dagobah, and Bales off living in opulence on Alderaan, and poor old Ben's sent to the back of beyond on a desert planet, subsisting as best as he can. Like you say, probably has to work simple jobs to make basic money to keep the lights on, sort of thing.
In his cave, but also actually there could be a sense of frustration, because you know what it's like. I think everybody's been there and could probably relate to this. You've had like a manager or something show you how to do something once quickly and then expect you to kind of understand everything that you need to be able to do that job. For instance, you could almost expect Yoda to kind of really just give him the brief outlines of like, oh, okay, this is how you kind of try and, you know, commune with Qui-Gon. Off you go. Obi-Wan could feel frustration because of that, i.e. because he's not connecting with Qui-Gon, and maybe he feels like he should be able to connect with Qui-Gon. And so he's been working at it for like 10 years to try and kind of like connect to this other world of the Force and stuff. Yeah, it's not happening. And I think it would be really cool to see that breakthrough moment on screen actually happen, and actually, you know, we just hear Qui-Gon's voice, if that's all it is going to be. And I think probably the voice makes sense more than in an actual physical connection, because it was a bit like that with Luke, wasn't it? Luke, you know, he heard Obi-Wan first, and then he kind of sees him slightly more hazily, and then by the time he's stronger in the Force in Return of the Jedi, he sees Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan's fully formed. I just wonder if whilst Obi-Wan makes contact initially, but obviously it's going to be maybe a little bit kind of vague, and maybe we're left kind of going, oh, did he? Has he just kind of, you know, imagined it? And then maybe Liam Neeson is actually in maybe a couple of episodes, or like, you know, the whole series, but his involvement gets increased with each episode.
That makes perfect sense, because obviously Luke learns from Ben and learns from Yoda and learns stuff himself and trains, and which we saw in Book of Boba Fett. You know, he's got Ahsoka teaching him stuff. So when he becomes a Force ghost, and obviously the connection that Rey has got with Luke is very strong, and she's very strong in the Force, because the Force as an entity is at a different point of its life cycle, if you want to refer to it in those terms. Her being more closely attuned to the Force, people go on about this whole Mary Sue thing, yada yada. I think they're not looking at the story close enough. I think the Force ebbs and flows like a tide. Mace says it in Revenge of the Sith. There's things that we're not seeing. The dark side's got prevalence and so on and so forth. The Force is sort of up and down like a tide. And I think Rey comes to the Force at a point where the Force is more open and ready for somebody like her to grab hold of it. And so her connection in terms of connecting to Luke, okay, he's on Acto. You're not going to get much closer to the hub of the Force than Acto. But nevertheless, he comes as a Force ghost that's physical and can literally physically grab things, whereas a Force ghost like Ben was to Luke was far more like a hologram almost, wasn't it? It was far an apparition, whereas Luke feels almost a physical being. So I think there's differences in the strength, the frequency of the Force as well. I watched Attack of the Clones the other day. The sequence where Obi-Wan is captured and Dooku's having the whole speech and just gives him the whole, the galaxy's run by a Sith Lord called Darth Sidious. And he's like, nah, that's nonsense. And he says, I could really use Qui-Gon's counsel. And Obi-Wan says, Qui-Gon Jinn would never join you. And I just wonder if there's a twist coming in the sense of when Ben finally speaks to Qui-Gon and conversation goes as conversation goes, and Qui-Gon says, well, actually, Dooku was right. That speech that Dooku made was so clever because he just laid it out and told the truth, and we've got nothing to hide. He was right about everything he said. So why would that not be something true?
Yeah.
Why would that line about Qui-Gon be the one lie in a speech full of truth? So I think there could be something in that as well.
So if you're new to the show and if you want to send in your own question, then Mark, can you let the good listeners know how they can get in touch?
I certainly can. And thanks for those questions, by the way, guys. If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fantadrax.com or check out the free...
That's free in Shuruk.
Fantatrax app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. You can reach out to us and send in those listeners' questions by emailing radio@fantatrax.com, or like this week, I did put a tweet out and 6 people came back with answers. We've done 3 this week. We'll do the other 3 over the next couple of weeks. So keep them coming. Send in thoughts, queries, questions, anything you like. We'll talk about all sorts of stuff. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Fantatrax, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fantatrax intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks only music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Remember to tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings, 9 o'clock UK, 4 PM Eastern, 1 PM Pacific on Facebook and YouTube, and check out Fantatrax Radio on Fridays, 7 o'clock UK time for new episodes of The Fantha from Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, and Cannon Fodder. And that's me done for this episode.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for that, Mark. Look after yourself, dude. And I will no doubt catch you next week for next week's episode. To everybody else, you stay safe, be strong in the Force, and shoot straight.
Coming up next on Fantatrax Radio, it's Desert Planet Discs.